200 meters, at the roundabout, continue straight onto Richmond Road, A9.
Because of those rains returning in November, otherwise it probably could have worked out a lot different. The fire season, as I said, already started in August in Queensland and New South Wales, and there are several fires, but then I guess the vegetation got doused a bit, and wood was averted.
And looking at biodiversity, what's happening to the number of species that are under threat in Australia at the moment?
Yeah, well, I guess it's just climbing year on year. This last year, we had 130 new species added to the list, making it over 2,000 species on the threatened species list now. That was a very high number. Typically, there's only about 30 or 29 species added every year.
In 200 meters, at the roundabout, take the second exit onto Richmond Road.
A deeper dive into what happened to the species after the Black Summer fires, and obviously that wasn't good news for quite a few of them.
There are now around 27 million people living in Australia. As the number of people grows, what sort of impact
Exit the roundabout onto Richmond Road. Continue on Richmond Road for 14 kilometers.
But what comes to mind immediately is that our emissions of greenhouse gases per
anticipated call between the US President Joe Biden and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. They hadn't spoken in a month, and that is a significant amount of time when there is this war ongoing in Gaza. And we have seen over the past month in particular a widening rift between these two leaders. So the US President continues to say that he is a steadfast supporter of Israel's right to defend itself. We have seen him criticize Israeli behavior in the way that it has carried out its military operation in Gaza. He's previously described it as over the top. And we have also seen other usually strong supporters of Israel, like the majority leader in the House, in the Senate here in the United States, Chuck Schumer. He's the highest elected Jewish official in the United States, and he has said that Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, is actually now an obstacle to peace, and as you would expect, that was not well received by the Israeli Prime Minister. We have had this talk now between the two leaders, and Jake Sullivan, again the National Security Advisor, says that although it was a business-like phone call, the President of the United States made clear to the Israeli Prime Minister that they do not support an invasion of Rafah, which is that city in the very southern tip of the Gaza Strip, where over 1 million Palestinians have sought sanctuary since being displaced by the Israeli attacks in the north of the Gaza Strip, unless there is proper consideration of what to do with those civilians, and that there needs to be a plan to feed and house them and ensure access to basic things like sanitation. So although we know from Jake Sullivan that no threats were made by the American president to, say, withhold military equipment or to somehow force Israel's hand, he made very clear that he does not agree with any sort of ground invasion like the sort we saw in the north of the Gaza Strip.
So that's Jake Sullivan, that's the US side of things. What's Israel said about the conversation?
So we actually heard from Benjamin Netanyahu before we heard from Jake Sullivan in the form of a very short statement, and it was a complete contrast in emphasis. He just said that they had discussed eliminating Hamas, freeing all of the Israeli hostages, and ensuring that Gaza never again constitutes a threat to Israel, while providing the necessary humanitarian aid that will assist in achieving these goals. So nothing from the Israeli side saying that the American president does not agree with a ground assault on Rafah. Obviously, they are not happy with that, but one of the concrete results of this conversation is that Washington requested that Israel send a team to Washington D.C. in order to discuss the plan for the assault on Rafah, and we do expect them to come in the coming days.
That there was our reporter in the US, Carrington Clark, and he was speaking to ABC News Radio's Thomas Parisi.
Presenting up-to-the-minute news and current affairs, we are ABC News Radio. We draw from the ABC's worldwide partner network and expert teams of journalists right here at the ABC. On broadcast, streaming and the ABC Listen app, ABC News Radio will keep you up to date. Know the story with ABC News Radio.
Well, you are listening to ABC News Radio with me, Sarah Morris. It is great to have your company this Tuesday morning. Now, Analog listeners are going to head to Parliament now, where the Senate is hearing condolence motions for former Labor Senator for Victoria, Linda White. She passed away last month. Now, you can continue to listen to us on ABC News Radio on your digital radio by heading to abc.net.forward/listen, or take us with you on the ABC Listen app.
The amazing
Tony Matthews with ABC News. Consumer advocates are welcoming the Australian Energy Regulator's draft plans to reduce benchmark electricity prices for hundreds of thousands of customers. The watchdog recommends price falls of up to 7% from July in certain areas, while suggesting rates should go up slightly in others. It would mean some small business customers could see power bills drop by nearly 10%. Director at Energy Consumers Australia, Jacqueline Crawshaw, says the plan looks promising.
It is a mixed bag. We're really pleased to see some of these results coming through for consumers. Now, it's only a draft decision, so we still have to wait to see where the final decision from the regulator lands, but it really is pointing in the right direction.
A man remains in a critical condition in a Western Sydney hospital after he was injured in what police have been told was a neighbourhood dispute. Police say the 41-year-old man and the 42-year-old woman were hit by a vehicle just before 9 o'clock last night on Cygnus Close at Doonside. Both were taken to Westmead Hospital. Police say a 27-year-old man was arrested nearby and taken to hospital.
In 600 metres, turn right onto Knox
He remains
Road.
under police guard. This neighbour heard the incident and went to help.
I heard like yelling and screaming, so there must be some sort of dispute. So then yeah, that's what made me actually come out. So yeah, I just seen the car hit the back of their car and drove off. Yeah, it still happened so quickly. I didn't actually see the thing go. I didn't actually see them get hit.
The Urban Development Institute of Australia is predicting the federal government
Turn
will
right
fall
onto
short
Knox
of its
Road.
goal to build 1.2 million homes by mid-2029. It believes the nation's housing supply will crash to its lowest level in over a decade by 2026 due to planning bottlenecks, labour shortages and soaring material costs. National President of the Institute, Cole Dutton,
Continue
says
on
cost
Knox
of
Road
living
for
has
800
continued to be
metres.
hard.
Yeah, certainly with the peak in housing and particularly the multi-unit sector and apartments, the costs have increased by 30 to 40% across Australia on average. It's certainly impacting the ability to pull attached dwellings, as in apartments and townhouses, out of the ground.
In 500 metres, at the roundabout, continue straight to stay on Knox Road.
Tech companies pressing them to explain how they're dealing with extremist content on their platforms. Google, Meta, X, WhatsApp, Telegram and Reddit have all been targeted by the regulator after failing to provide the information under the existing voluntary frameworks they've agreed to. The Commissioner, Julie Inman-Grant, says primary school-aged children are too often being exposed to harmful extremist material.
Beheadings, rapes, murder, but there's also things like manifestos or radicalizing material that could, range from Islamic State terrorism to conspiracy theories to misogynistic tropes that can spill into real-world harm, targeting women.
Federal crossbenchers are pushing for significant electoral reform, including a donation cap and a real-time disclosure threshold of donations of more than $1,000. Legislation will be introduced in both houses, with crossbenchers pushing to get reform by the next election. Independent MP Kate Cheney says the donation cap would level the playing field among candidates.
No individual can donate more than 2% of the total amount of public funding from the last election. At the moment, that would be about $1.5 million.
A man has died after a collision involving two cars at Cowra in the state's central west. The 34-year-old driver of one of the cars was trapped briefly before being released and died while paramedics were taking him to the airport. The driver of the other vehicle has been taken to the Orange Hospital for mandatory testing. And the Matilda stars Steph Catley, Kyra Cooney-Cross and Caitlin Ford will face off against an inaugural
that extreme that there's no escaping it. It's a real risk to physical health.
First today, steady as she goes. Economists are widely tipping the Reserve Bank will keep interest rates on hold at 4.35%. The question is, after 13 interest rate rises, when will the central bank see fit to cut borrowing costs for Australians? Our business reporter David Taylor joined me earlier. David, what's the Reserve Bank likely to do with interest rates today?
Rachel, I think the Reserve Bank will keep interest rates on hold at 4.35%, where interest rates have been for some time now. But the key here is that there has been a tightening bias in the Reserve Bank's language over the past few months. And when I say tightening bias, simply that the Reserve Bank has kept rates on hold, but has threatened, if you like, to push interest rates up if necessary, if inflation runs away from where they think inflation is heading. So that's an important point to make. But in terms of the outlook and the economic picture, Rachel, the economy is slowing down. Unemployment is creeping up. Now, in that scenario, you'd have to say that the interest rate increases that we've had, 13 since the Reserve Bank began raising interest rates 2 years ago, are doing their job. Demand is coming down, and that's producing disinflation, or a lesser of an increase in prices at the stores. So inflation has come down a long way since it peaked around about 8%, but there's still further to go. So the Reserve Bank's thinking is that if we hang out that threat that interest rates could still go higher, consumers will resist spending at the stores, and perhaps inflation will come down a little further without unemployment having to rise as a result. That's the state of play at the moment.
So what is the big hurdle getting in the way of the RBA cutting interest rates?
Well, somewhat inconveniently, Rachel, it's mathematical. The inflation rate at the moment sits at around 4.1%. Now, the Reserve Bank, and it's not alone in this, other international central banks have a similar goal, but the goal is to get inflation on average over time to between 2 and 3%. So that's a rise in prices over the year of around about 2.5%. Now, the problem is there's around about 1.1 percentage points of inflation to go to get to the top of that band, and that's called the last mile. The last mile is to get inflation to where the Reserve Bank wants it to be, and it can be difficult, Rachel. The reason is because higher interest rates tend to lower demand in the economy, but the prices that are proving particularly sticky include petrol, rent, property prices, insurance premiums, and of course out-of-pocket healthcare costs, not to mention food. A lot of those prices don't really get determined by how much demand there is in the economy. So it's hoping a combination of higher interest rates, or at least the Reserve Bank keeping interest rates at what's called in restrictive territory. So it hurts a little bit. The Reserve Bank keeping interest rates there, and structural reform from successive governments will help to ultimately lower prices to where economists and policymakers think it's going to be comfortable. But again, because the higher interest rates don't necessarily bring these prices down to where they need to be, there are question marks over how exactly prices will fall to where the Reserve Bank is comfortable, and that of course raises the prospect of another interest rate increase, or, Rachel, somewhat inconveniently for borrowers, interest rates remaining higher for longer.
David Taylor, so what impact will today's decision have on Australians? While inflation is dropping, the cost of household items still feels high, and two unlikely political allies are coming together to do something about it. Elizabeth Cramsey reports. On the streets of Sydney, residents are certainly feeling the cost of living pinch.
I would say food expenses. Thank God I'm blessed to have plenty of work, but I would say animal day expenses.
We just signed onto a new lease and faced quite a significant rental increase. I think within the maximum, like the allowed percentage, they're allowed to increase rent by. What's hitting your wallet the hardest?
Electricity, gas.
Electricity and gas, rent also it is increasing. Otherwise, everything is gone up.
With inflation still well above the target point of 2 to 3%, interest rates remain high, and it's not clear yet when mortgage borrowers might see a serious reprieve. Deanna Messina is the Deputy Chief Economist at AMP.
Well, if you just look at the headline inflation, it's still tracking around 3.5% or so, and then on the core measures, it's a little bit higher than that. When the RBA is thinking, about future monetary policy, it doesn't necessarily have to see inflation at that point in time in the target band to be comfortable about potentially cutting interest rates, because the RBA is a forward-looking institution. Inflation is a lagging indicator. She believes the cost of living has actually improved. If you look at the main drags on household income in the past 12 months, the main one has been inflation, followed by taxes, so the tax burden, people moving up in the tax bracket, so bracket creep, and interest rate hikes. If we think about where inflation peaked, it peaked at around 8% in December of 2022, and now it's come down to just over 3%. So we have seen quite a large fall. So why doesn't it feel like it? Because inflation's gone up so much in the past 3 years, they feel the level change in price, not necessarily the percentage change, because inflation, as economists talk about inflation, is a percentage change in prices. If prices stay flat now compared to last year, that's actually 0% inflation. But I think as everyday people feel the level change in prices, so things still feel expensive, even though the pace of inflation has actually gone down.
In 300 meters, at the roundabout, take the second exit and stay on Brabham Drive.
The Nationals are backing a move by the Greens to try and create towers to break up Coles and Woolworths. The bill would allow courts to force major supermarkets to sell parts of their business if they abuse their market dominance. Common ground between the Greens and Nationals leader David Littleproud.
Well, look, it's not something normal, but it's something that I think has developed out of the pure necessity.
Exit the roundabout onto Brabham Drive. In 600 meters, at the roundabout, take the third exit onto Ferris Road.
The change remains an outside chance for now. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says he won't support the move. Elizabeth Cramsey and Rima Cheer reporting. Well, while we're talking about the cost of living, there's some relief afoot for South Australia, with power bills for homes and businesses set to fall from July. After price hikes of up to 40% in the past 2 years, the new benchmark electricity prices from the Australian Energy Regulator would cut prices for hundreds of thousands of customers on the East Coast by as much as 10% for the first time in 2 years. It's not good for everyone, with customers in some parts of the country expected to see further increases. Alison Shaw reports. David Yardley
Exit the roundabout onto Ferris Road.
travels to festivals and
In
events
200 meters,
Victoria
at the
during
roundabout,
season
take the first exit and stay on Ferris Road.
have become a headache.
Basically, we're getting split in the last 18 months. It's gone up significantly, really higher, more than 2,600. When the email comes through to advisors that the power bill's there, there's a sort of an intake of breath and, okay, what's it going to be? What's the lotto going to give us this time? And it's never good news, to be honest.
He's changed his energy supplier and investigating more options for solar panels to bring his bills down.
We could probably double our solar. I mean, and that would have a significant impact. Paying for that at the moment is just, the point is that we don't have the spare cash to do this.
But
roundabout, continue straight to stay on Ferris Road.
Latest environmental forecast. The annual climate report has found that while last year was the hottest year on record globally, environmental conditions across the country remained mostly good. But over the last 12 months, a record number of plants and animals were added to the threatened species list, the Manapaikat reports. 2023 was a rollercoaster year for Australia when it comes to weather.
Thousands of homes in far north Queensland.
Firefighters in Perth's northeast are
A
spending the
mop-up
day
operation is underway at Lake Conjola on
The Bureau of Meteorology says there's been around 20,000 lightning strikes.
Professor Albert Van Dyke from ANU says after several years of La Nina, which typically means cooler, wetter weather in the Pacific region, conditions suddenly got very dry and unseasonably warm over the winter months.
From May to October or thereabouts, we started seeing some pretty serious fire activity, and by August until October, and then it started raining again in November, which kind of helped prevent worse fires. It was expected there to be like an El Nino hot summer, but fortunately the rain came back and helped put a lid on that.
The latest environmental scorecard, which looks at data on the world's oceans, weather, water, vegetation, fire and biodiversity, shows Australia worsened in 2023. It fell from 8.7 out of 10 to 7.5, and Professor Van Dyke says the country fared better than much of the rest of the globe.
77 countries last year saw the hottest year on record. Australia was not one of them. Of course, yes, it's a temporary reprieve, doesn't mean we're not experiencing global warming. The positives also, that fire season could have been a horrific fire season, didn't eventuate quite as feared, and that gave nature as well as agriculture and
In 400 meters, turn left onto the Horsley Drive.
continue to perform well and then recover from also the fires from 2019, for instance.
The number of endangered animals and plants grew by 25%. A record 130 species were added to the endangered species list, many still recovering from the Black Summer bushfires. Associate Professor Jim Radford is a threatened species
Turn left
expert
onto
from
the
La Trobe
Horsley Drive.
University. He says this is the tip of the iceberg.
There's several thousand species on the national list of threatened species, and that's growing every year. And there's many more that we either don't know about or we know about, but the formal
In 600 meters, use the right lane to turn slightly right to stay on the Horsley Drive.
Than the ever-growing list of threatened species indicates.
When it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, the report shows an increase for the first time since 2018. Transport and agriculture driving the trend. But it's not all bad news. Carbon emitted from electricity production falling by 3.5%. So what does this say about our efforts to reduce environmental decline? The federal government has been consulting on reforms to the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act since the middle of last year. Ariane Wilkinson is WWF Australia's Senior Manager of Climate and Energy Policy. She says
Use the right lane to
legislation needs
turn
have
slightly
serious
right to stay on the
teeth
Horsley
if it determines
Drive.
decline around.